Our first session today is Demystifying JamfUploader, taking your Jamf AutoPkg workflows to the next level. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Anthony Reimer and Graham Pugh. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Would you please share your slides? Okay.
All good?
Got slides. We're going to send them live. And okay, you are good to go. Thank you very much for presenting.
Thanks, Rusty. I'm Anthony Reimer. As I am coming to you today from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I am currently the head technician of the Integrated Arts Media Labs at the University of Calgary. MacAdmins was the first conference that took a chance on me as a presenter in 2012, so I'm both grateful and thrilled to present at this conference once again.
And hi everyone, I'm Graham Pugh, and I'm a senior client engineer at ETH Zurich, which is the Swiss Federal Technical University. I just wanted to say how much of an honor it is to be presenting for the MacAdmins at Penn State Conference. 8 years ago, last week, as a relatively new MacAdmin looking for ideas, I flew from the UK, my home, to Washington, DC, drove up to State College, Pennsylvania, and attended the first day of my first ever MacAdmin conference, which is a workshop called MacAdmin Fundamentals, co-led by Anthony. I learned so much in that workshop and the subsequent presentations over the next few days, including hearing about AutoPkg for the first time. And it's not an exaggeration to say that the conference was transformational in my career. So I want to give my appreciation to this conference and to Anthony today. And I also want to move the slide forward. Here it comes. This presentation is aimed at Jamf Pro administrators like Anthony and myself, either at people who are looking to start automating their package uploads, or people who are already using AutoPkg for uploading packages to Jamf with JSS Importer. And our agenda today is first a very brief overview of what JamfUploader is. And Anthony?
And then I will talk about how I started my JamfUploader automation journey.
After that, I'll talk from the perspective of an existing JSS importer user looking to convert to JamfUploader. And finally, because we have too much to cover, we're going to allow you to choose from a series of FAQs that you would like us to try and clarify. So, what is JamfUploader? Anthony and I actually introduced JamfUploader at a presentation back in October of last year at the JNUC conference. For those of you who haven't seen that, I'm going to briefly explain what it is. JamfUploader consists of a set of AutoPkg processes for uploading things to Jamf Pro using the Jamf Pro APIs. The idea behind these processes is similar to the core AutoPkg processes, in that each processor is designed to do a single task. You only add the processes you need to perform the complete set of tasks required. If you've used JSS Importer, you'll know that it's a single processor that does a bunch of different API requests all in one. But the 6 JamfUploader processes shown here can be added to an AutoPkg recipe in combination to produce exactly the same result. That means an uploaded package, a new policy, and a smart group or groups, plus any required scripts and extension attributes. What I would consider an advantage of JamfUploader over JSS Importer is that its individual processes provide greater flexibility and visibility of what the recipe is actually doing. For example, if you only want to upload a package, then you only need to add the JamfPatchUploader processor to your recipe. You can assign a category to the package if that category already exists in Jamf. And if you want the category to make, if you want the recipe to make sure the category exists, like creating it if it's not already there, then you would also include the Jamf category uploader processor in your AutoPkg recipe. Now, if you want to create a policy when that package is uploaded, which has the package attached to it, then you add the Jamf policy uploader processor. And if you want to scope that policy to a computer group, then you add the Jamf computer group uploader processor. So your recipe can have as many or few processes as it needs to create or update whatever objects you need in your Jamf Pro server. Each of the processes can appear more than once if they need to, say if you're creating more than one category or more than one computer group. It's flexible. Now, since our JNUC presentation last year, more processes have been added to the suite, including by some other contributors, allowing more types of Jamf objects to be created. JamfUploader is no longer confined to that package group policy workflow. I use recipes, for example, to create script-based policies like uninstaller policies, to configure Mac App Store apps so that they have consistent settings, to upload configuration profiles, and even to maintain the correct privileges for our administrators. And there are also some other processes that are part of the suite, but not for uploading. We have a processor for deleting a policy, which I use to delete a testing policy when the package is moved to production. There's also a processor for flushing a policy, which is good if you use once per computer policies. And we have processes that are used for sending notifications of the results of the other processes to Slack or Teams. But before I get too far into the weeds, let's go back to the beginning and look at one practical way to begin using the processes. So Anthony, over to you.
Thanks, Graham. I'm a longtime AutoPkg user, but most of my experience was focused on the benefits of automatically finding and fetching software installers, plus making custom installer packages in a programmatic way. We only adopted Jamf Pro at our institution in a serious way when Apple's guidance on MDM solutions changed from "it's nice to have" to "select your MDM vendor." My AutoPkg workflows had never fed a management system before, unless of course you consider Deploy Studio and ARD to be management systems. So I was starting from scratch when it came to integrating AutoPkg and Jamf Pro. I'm going to break this part of the talk into two sections. First, how do I want to deploy and update my software using Jamf Pro? This is a good exercise to do whether you're using AutoPkg or not, and whether you're using Jamf Pro or any other management system. And secondly, how do I get AutoPkg to do as much of that work as possible for me? All of this is influenced by my context. I manage a few dozen Macs in my computer labs. Everything has to be installed by me or the management system. Self-service is not a thing. There are also no testing groups in computer labs. Essentially, I am the testing group. As well, my labs are a site within Jamf Pro. While some of the installer packages I upload via AutoPkg may be used by others, I write all my own policies with the exceptions of things like antivirus, which central IT controls. And finally, my hardware tends to get replaced in small groups, not full labs. This means that I have to be able to enroll and initially deploy a new Mac at any time. Supporting that workflow also gives me the flexibility to nuke and pave as needed. I mention all of this because my context is not necessarily your context. So you should take all of this into consideration when considering how you wish to manage the computers under your direction. I started out using Jamf Pro from the web interface to create policies and upload configuration profiles, and I used JamfAdmin to upload installer packages and scripts. So the strategic goal for me was to automate what I was already doing with policies and packages, because I understood how to do that. There are certainly other strategies, but this is where I started. The next consideration in developing an overall deployment strategy was related to how and how often I wanted to push out updates. Which titles do I want to patch very rapidly? An example might be web browsers, where every second patch seems to fix a security vulnerability, and users would have an alternative browser to use if an update did break something unexpectedly. I also have an aggressive policy on macOS updates, and since it is a lab, I can do it overnight or whenever I see a computer not in use. In contrast, which titles do I want to hold off patching unless things are broken or I can find a break in the schedule? Which items are somewhere in the middle between those two extremes? For example, we don't upgrade major versions of software during a 4-month academic term, but we might push updates within a major version if they are available. Also, the bigger your payload, the more work you have if your process is controlled manually. So if you're like me and have 50 titles to push and manage, that may lead to a more conservative update posture unless you can get some help through automation. Hint, hint, AutoPkg. Patch management in Jamf Pro got a whole lot better when Jamf purchased Mondada. So when I was devising my deployment strategy, I wanted to use patch where I could because it supports blocker apps a la Monkey and the ability to specify a particular version in case you need to make an emergency downgrade. Of course, patch management only updates an app that is already on the computer, so you also have to create a policy to do the initial install when using it. Finally, you may have change management processes that you have to follow or other external factors that influence what you can or cannot do. In my case, since virtually all my work is scoped to my site of a few dozen computers, my main restriction is getting software approved by legal and IT before I can deploy it. Otherwise, the mess I make is my own and it doesn't affect others. So here's a summary of what my manual Jamf Pro workflow looks like. For most of my titles, I have a Jamf Pro policy that runs once per computer on enrollment or check-in that installs the software. When a new version is released, I replace the package in the policy and manually flush the policy when I want to push the update. For my Adobe Creative Cloud and Microsoft Office apps, I have a normal policy install the major version of the app, and then I trigger the vendor's update mechanism. In the case of RUM or Adobe's Remote Update Manager, I run a one-liner once per week that checks for updates of the currently deployed major version. In the case of Microsoft Auto Update, I have a configuration policy that turns that update mechanism on. This vendor update trigger, I only need to set up once. So I still, even in an AutoPkg world, still do those two things manually. For titles I've set up using patch management, I set up the same regular policy for initial deployment, but then I set up a patch management software title, linking the latest package to the correct version in the definition tab, and then add a patch policy that knows about that definition. When a new version is released, I once again link the latest package to the correct version in the definition tab and update the patch policy to push out the new package to those computers in scope that have the software title. So that's the Jamf Pro deployment workflow I'm looking for AutoPkg to help me automate. Just a small aside. I've adopted a convention where I add the word latest to the end of the policy name that controls updating of the title. This way, I can tell at a glance whether a particular policy is linked to a patch title or not. This is also consistent with other methodologies that append the version number to the policy name to indicate it is just for this version. I use the word latest to indicate that the policy, whether regular or patch policy, will be updated. If latest doesn't appear, it only applies to an initial install. There are a lot of ways you can integrate AutoPkg with Jamf Pro depending on your needs. I wrote a blog post about this in December 2020 if you want more detail on the considerations I made prior to deciding on JamfUploader. I found that JamfUploader was the most AutoPkg-like in design, and as Graham mentioned earlier, you could use as little or as much as you wanted. It also had no additional dependencies like the rest of the tools on this slide. And since I had a lot of experience writing recipes, this would be easy for me to adopt. So how did I get started? I started by writing recipes that simply got the latest package installer into Jamf Pro. As Graham described earlier, you can create a very simple recipe using one or two JamfUploader processors. Here's what a simple package upload recipe looks like with Jamf Category Uploader and Jamf Package Uploader. As Graham mentioned earlier, the category processor is optional if the category you want already exists on the server. In the recipes in my repo, I do not use the category processor. Note that I'm showing you this recipe in YAML format for ease of presentation, just easier to read on a slide, but you can also write your Jamf recipes in plist format, which you'll find that I do. So if you look in my repo, all my recipes will be in the traditional plist format. Next, I wanted to automatically create a policy that used the particular package I just uploaded. So I added the Jamf Policy Uploader processor. As a safety measure, most such recipes add a stop processing if processor just before changing or adding the package to avoid messing with an existing policy. This is particularly important. Let me take a breath here. So that point's particularly important if you follow this with a step that flushes the policy using Jamf Policy Log Flusher, because that would trigger an install automatically based on whatever triggers you had in the policy. You can see the problem. Even if it's the same package over and over, it could do multiple installs. The Jamf Policy Uploader processor is a little more complicated than the other ones because it requires that you have a policy template. I described this in some detail in our JNUC 2021 presentation, including how you can use the Jamf Classic API to help model a template. But the short version is that you will want a few templates for the different scopes that you have. The need for templates is true of a few Jamf Uploader processors. These templates consist of XML that gets sent to the Jamf Pro server via the Classic API, but in true AutoPkg fashion, you can use variables from the recipe to customize what you send to the server. There are models available in Graham's repo and my repo that you can copy, or you can model your own using the Classic API, as I described earlier. There's no one template that will work for everyone, so there is really no default template that most people can just use. Let's look at a possible policy template for a recipe I showed you a moment ago. This template falls in line with that Jamf Pro update strategy that I'm trying to automate. As I said before, I want to trigger it on check-in or on enrollment. It's going to be a once per computer policy, and I've chose to have it try 2 more times if it fails. As you can see, I've scoped mine to my site, and in this case, I've made the scope to all the computers on my site. And like I said, I run labs, so right at the bottom where it says U for self-service, false. I'm not going to use self-service. The policy name, policy category, and site are all supplied as input variables in the recipe, and the package name is generated via earlier processors. For those who have worked with AutoPkg recipes before, this is why there are variables in the input dictionary that don't actually appear in the process section of the recipe, which is quite unusual normally. That's because they are needed for the template and not directly in a processor. The most common variation I have on this template is to scope a policy to a particular group. I just make the substitution shown and save it to a different template name. Note that the group name variable would need to be added to the input variables in order to use this modified template. So here's the same recipe I showed you earlier, but now scoped to a group. The changes are highlighted. And just as we can omit the Jamf Category Uploader processor if we want to use an existing category, we can omit the Jamf Computer Group Uploader processor and the group template input key if we are willing to use an existing smart or static group as the scope of our policy. For simplicity's sake, that latter approach is what I do. So my most common Jamf recipes only have 3 processor steps: Jamf Package Uploader, Stop Processing If, and Jamf Policy Uploader. But what about when I want to use patch management? Marcel Kessler contributed JamfPatchUploader to this project, which tries to take care of all the manual steps you would do to update a patch title when a new version comes in, as I've shown on screen. Using this processor has saved me a lot of time, but there are some common issues you should be aware of that correspond to each of the steps noted on screen. Number 1, JamfPatchUploader can't select the patch title definition from Jamf's catalog, so you must manually go into patch management and create the title before running the recipe. You will need to feed the processor the exact name of the patch title you created using an input variable. Luckily, you only have to do this once per title. Number 2, in some rare cases, the version that your package recipe uses and puts in the version variable doesn't match the form of the patch title. You may need to use a shared processor like Version Splitter or Find and Replace from Elliott Jordan to massage the version string to match what patch management is looking for. 3, just like with regular policies, you'll need a patch policy template for JamfUploader to do his magic. And 4, you can't reference an icon directly via the API, so you have to specify a regular policy that uses that icon. That could be a self-service policy from earlier in the recipe chain if you like. I don't use self-service, so I don't need an icon, but because of the way the processor is written, you need to include the icon fields in your template, even if they're blank. Marcel wrote a detailed blog post about this processor this past February that deals with many more technical details and use cases. It's a great reference, particularly if your workflow is different than mine for patch. As I mentioned earlier, patch only works on titles that are already installed. So I want to have a child recipe that uploads the package and creates or updates the policies associated with it. So for titles that I want to use with patch, the way I've implemented it is I have an additional child recipe that creates or updates the patch policy of an existing title. Even though these are both .jamf recipes, you can distinguish between the two types of recipes by the label just before .jamf. This is a convention Graham started when he originally released JamfUploader. If the recipe didn't match the old JSS recipe functionality, then he added a qualifying label within the file name. The basic format is appname-label.jamf. For example, for a recipe that simply uploaded a package with its category, Graham labeled it with -package-upload. I label my package and policy recipes with -latest, since they update packages and policies with the latest version. If I were to add a Jamf policy log flusher step to a latest recipe, I would put that step in a child recipe with a flush label. On screen, I'm talking about patch recipes, and so my patch-related child recipes are labeled with -patch. Feel free to adopt what other people are using if your usage is a match, but it is more important that you use an internally consistent nomenclature, particularly if you choose to share your recipes publicly. So my patch recipes are very simple. The recipe that establishes the policy, what I call -latest, is the parent. I add one processor step and provide the input variables needed for the processor to do its work. In all my cases, the scoping for the regular policy is the same as the patch policy, so I could just use the existing variable group name if needed. If you wanted something different for scoping, you could add one or more input variables for use in your patch template. Patch policy templates are much simpler than regular policy templates. The only thing that makes it more or less complicated in my case is the scoping. To show you the most complicated example, this is my template for scoping to a particular group. Graham has 2 sample patch templates in his repo, including one for self-service, that show all the fields available in patch policies. Those are a good reference if you want something more elaborate than what I have here. I mentioned my naming convention for recipes. Well, I also have a naming convention for policy and patch policy templates. Going from left to right. If it's a policy or a patch policy, I start with that. If you were doing this for creating groups, for example, maybe you'd put the word group there. I then put a dash. Am I installing it or am I moving it for self-service? And so for mine, it's always going to be install. Dash. Am I just updating a policy with the latest version, or is this going to create a policy with a version number in it? Again, all mine are going to say latest, but if I were using a version specific one, I would put the word version here in my template name. Dash, is it going to be scoped to a site, or is it going to be scoped globally? Or in the case of patch management policies. The site scoping, if it exists, is back in the patch definition. So you would literally just omit this qualifier. And then dash, how are we going to scope it? We're going to scope it to all, are we going to scope it to group, or are we going to scope it to all except an exclusion group? I have ones where the scoping is so complicated that I just create a new policy, a new template specifically for that app. And so I just name it appline, for example, Zoom for me. Or a neat function of this is I can have one that's unscoped. So if I never include the scope in, if I never include the scope in the template, that XML, it will not overwrite what's already there. So I've used this, for example, for a one-off piece of software that I only install on an individual thing, and it might be a different one every time. I just leave it unscoped, and then I go in manually and scope it. If I created, so that's how I do this. As you can see, when someone asks about the default template for Jamf recipes, there is no one good answer because the permutations are significant. However, that's the strength of JamfUploader. It's so flexible, it means you can get exactly what you want in an automated fashion. Finally, another common question is about where the template should be stored so that the JamfUploader processors will find them. If you provide a full path to a template, it will use that path. If you supply only the file name, then there is a hierarchy of locations where JamfUploader will look. Top of the list is the recipe overrides folder within the AutoPkg working directory. Next is in the same folder as the Jamf recipe you overrode. And finally, JamfUploader looks anywhere in the same repo as the recipe being run, so that you can put all your common templates in a common folder if you so choose. My recommendation, if you were just starting out, is to put the recipes you are currently writing into the recipes folder within home directory /library/AutoPkg. If that folder doesn't exist, create it. Then the templates and any scripts and icons can go into recipe overrides folder along with the recipe overrides themselves. They can run from those locations permanently if you don't want or need to make them public. In fact, while I was learning about JamfUploader, this is how I worked. In fact, until last week, this is how I operated in production. Nothing wrong with that. But now I've got enough and I'm ready to share my recipes and templates. So I've been moving the recipes and templates from those folders to my JazAce recipes repo in the AutoPkg project. I put my Jamf recipes inside a folder named after the vendor of the application, right beside my download and package recipes where applicable. I write most of my recipes using a starter template, which I've also shared in my repo if you want a head start. My policy and patch templates are in a folder named Jamf Templates. The only time I don't put them there is in that case I mentioned earlier where I have a template specific to an app. Those go with the app. Note that once you move your local recipes to a Git repo, you should remove the policy templates, icons, and scripts from the recipes override folder and any recipes from the local recipes folder, since AutoPkg will see those copies before the copies you now have in your AutoPkg repo. I know Graham has other ideas to share about how you might organize your JamfUploader related resources, much of which is similar to how the old JSS recipes are organized. So this is a good time to hand it over to him.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Yeah, the way I do it is slightly different. Just another option for organizing the files in your Git repo is by type. So, for example, have a different folder for each recipe type. I've only listed one type here, Jamf recipes, but I have several different types of recipe. And I also have separate folders for scripts, for the self-service icons, and for the templates. This organization is up to you. The only rule here is that with recipes, AutoPkg will only look into a top-level folder in the repo for recipes. So you can't have recipes in a folder further down, like deeper than that. However, for the templates and icons and scripts, JamfUploader will look deeper into a folder structure. So, Anthony's covered how Jamf recipes can be constructed from scratch and how you might organize your files. But like many of you watching, I already had a bunch of JSS recipes, and you might be wondering, why change? So I want to talk about why and how you should go about converting to Jamf recipes. I've been maintaining the JSS importer project for the past few years, after taking it off Shay Craig's hands after he stopped working for a company that used Jamf anymore. And a year or two ago, I really struggled to make JSS importer compatible with Python 3. In fact, I was saved only by some great detective work by Elliot Jordan. It became clear to me that I was not clever enough, really, to properly understand underlying framework. And I made calls for collaborators in various conferences over the years, but they were not successful. I think other people were a bit scared off by the code as well. So this left my organization vulnerable because we depended on JSS importer for all our Mac packaging. And if some future change to Jamf Pro or the Mac OS system broke the code in a way that I couldn't fix, we could be in trouble at short notice. With no obvious alternative to JSS importer that integrates with AutoPkg, I decided it was time to bite the bullet and write my own replacement that better suited our organization. As this project turned into the Jamf, excuse the sirens in the background, this project turned into the JamfUploader processes. And then in December of last year, Jamf stated that basic authentication for API would be discontinued between August and December of this year. It was easy for me to make the changes to the code for JamfUploader to accommodate the new bearer token authentication method, because it's my simple code. But I was not able to figure it out for JSS importer and its complicated underlying Python framework. So this was that breaking change that I feared. So I decided to concentrate my time on converting all the remaining existing in-house JSS recipes that I'd previously written to Jamf recipes, so that my organization would be ready for bearer token auth before August 2022 and not require JSS importer anymore. And I achieved this a few weeks ago, and we no longer use JSS importer at all. So it is kind of dead to us now. But for you, those of you still using JSS importer, it's definitely time to plan your migration to another solution. There are a few tools out there to help you, and I've been trying to contribute to that transition, both in terms of some new tools and advice in the MacAdmins Slack, along with others in the JamfUpload channel, including Anthony. I'd like to introduce one tool now called JamfRecipeMaker. This is a tool for taking the inputs from a JSS or package recipe and using them to construct an equivalent Jamf recipe. It's an AutoPkg processor itself, but you can use it by adding it to your AutoPkg run as a pre-processor step. The default options result in the processor creating a recipe that just uploads the package, nothing else. By default, it writes the recipes in YAML format, but if you prefer the traditional plist format, you can add the format key to output to plist. And if you add the keys make policy equals true and make category equals true, then it will spit out a full recipe that also creates the policy, smart group, and category, all the same things as the existing JSS recipe. So this is the recipe it spits out. It creates the category, package, smart group, and policy. Just be aware that if the JSS recipe had any extension attributes, scripts, or anything a bit more exotic in it, these won't be migrated. It's not clever enough for that. So you would have to add those to the recipe manually, but it's a good start. Now, since AutoPkg can run entire recipe lists in one run, I decided that I would try and give people a head start, and with these 3 steps, I was able to generate a recipe list of all 100 or so recipes that are in the old JSS recipes repo, and convert them all to Jamf recipes in just a few minutes. Perhaps you could do the same with your own repo of JSS recipes. I've uploaded all those recipes to my repo. This is the old JSS recipes repo in GitHub. And you can see that all of the same recipes are now in my repo as -package_upload.jamfrecipes. That's in one folder, and also in another folder, the .jamf recipes, which are the equivalents to the old JSS recipes. If they don't quite fit your workflow because you need different templates or whatever, then they should still be a good reference for writing your own recipes. And finally, because my organization has a specific set of needs that never did fit that JSS importer standard, we've always maintained our own recipes. Switching to Jamf recipes was an opportunity to make our own recipes available in a public GitHub repo, including, as you can see, some pretty shameful Git commit comments. We have hundreds of recipes openly available for those who want to see examples of how to write more exotic Jamf recipes. There's the link at the bottom there. So I've been able to make those public. Any secrets that we have in our recipes, license keys or whatever, are just simply added into the recipe overrides directly. They're not in the recipes, and we keep our recipe overrides in a private repo. I want to quickly mention templates again for those people migrating from JSS importer. Smart group templates are basically the same, but policy templates are not the same. Some good news is that for scripts and extension attributes, we don't need templates at all anymore, which JSS importer did. And you can put variable substitutions like with the percentage signs in your scripts and EAs that are used for JamfUploader. So let's quickly look at what is different between the policy template of a JSS recipe and a Jamf recipe. Here is a template that works with JSS importer. The scope, package, script, and icons are abstracted out of the template and handled instead directly by JSS importer and its underlying framework. It was always possible to set these manually in the template, but I rarely saw anyone do this, except maybe the bit where you would scope to all computers. So most of you are going to have templates like this. But this template does not work with Jamf Policy Uploader. You have to provide these sections in the normal form. Here comes another siren. Hope you can still hear me. Not sure what's going on here in Germany. Anyway, so here is that section with the scope, packages, and scripts as you would need them in a Jamf uploader processor. This is exactly what it looks like if you export the policy XML from Jamf Pro's API documentation on your instance, except of course you can add variables so that you can reuse the template. Anthony talked about how to do this in our 2021 JNUC presentation. I just wanted to give a shout out to a cool web browser bookmarklet called Export Jamf XML by, I hope I get the names right, Gabriel Sroka and Bilal Habib, which is by far the easiest way to grab the XML from a policy or smart group. You just navigate to the page in your browser, click on the button, and it downloads the XML for you. Finally, you're not alone. We're here to help you make the transition to JamfUploader. The best place to come for help is the Jamf Upload channel in the MacAdmins Slack. And now back to Anthony.
Over the past year, more and more people have joined the Jamf Upload channel in the MacAdmins Slack to ask about getting started with JamfUploader. And you've had lots and lots and lots of questions. we tried to answer, in fact, some happening during this presentation. We've tried to answer some in the slides we've already presented, but we want to turn the rest of our time over to you to cover any other topics you're most interested in, because we have way more content than we have time today. So we present to you the Wheel of Topics. We probably won't get to all of these, but any slides we have for the topics shown will be included in the slide deck we share at the end. So put your votes in the Q&A or in the PSU Mac Slack channel where you can actually see an image of all the topics. Of course, you're welcome to ask any question you would like in the Q&A. So let's hand it to our moderators to see where we should go. Actually, while we wait for the first question to come in, maybe we should just give you a chance to respond. Maybe we should just pick one. Graham, pick one to talk about.
Oof, you're asking me now. Maybe, should we go for recipe writing tips?
Sure, we'll pick one of mine. Okay, you get to do the rest of the talking. Okay. So we talked about these specific types of things, but how do you write? How do you go about writing? You say, okay, now I see the benefit of writing recipes. How I do it? Well, Graham just went through converting JSS importer recipes that you may have. You can write like everyone else does and take someone else's work and adapt it. There are already examples for in Graham's repo, my repo, James Smith's repo, Rich Troughton's recipes repo that you might want to refer to. Recipe Robot is starting to, in the dev branch, has support for the JSS style of Jamf recipe. So if you know how to build the Jamf, build it from dev, you can use that or wait for the next release. An interesting option is the recipe builder tool by Michael Lofgren. It looks a little bit like this, and it is pretty much a, click the button or drag the button in and it puts down the XML for your plist to build the recipe. What I tend to do is use a template or occasionally just write it from scratch, which is not too bad if you're just doing one of the patch child recipes I showed earlier. But my main workflow is when I'm writing or modifying recipes, I have a constantly evolving set of text clippings for BBEdit, because that's the tool I use, that insert the XML for a particular processor and its common arguments. I've made my current set of text clippings available in my personal GitHub repo, both to share with others and because this allows me to keep my text clippings in sync between the different Macs I use for editing recipes. If you want more information on general AutoPkg recipe writing, check out the AutoPkg wiki, particularly the page I've linked in the slide. If you prefer to learn by watching videos, you can always check out the presentation I did at the 2019 Mac Tech Conference on that topic. So I see we're getting some action on the wheels.
Just wanted to add there, Anthony,
yeah.
Like actually the way I do it, what happens is once you start making these recipes, you come across ones that are the same as things you've done before. So I just have a page in our kind of internal documentation that sort of marks what are the best example to use for an application of a certain type. So if it's a basic application that doesn't need anything extra and the version number is the standard way, etc., then I use a certain app. I think it's ClickShare. If it needs a post-install script, then I have the one I always go to, which is Element, I think. I just copy that recipe and then start editing the bits that are different, which in Jamf recipes, the parts that are different are not much at all, actually. You're changing the name and maybe the group and things. There's very little in the icon name. So once you get into it, it becomes easier and easier to just steal from yourself kind of thing.
Okay, actually, before we hand it back to our hosts for Q&A, I've already seen multiple requests for JCDS mode. So, Graham, why don't you take care of that one?
All right, yeah, so JCDS mode It's something I did recently to JamfPatchUploader to try and address reliability issues with uploading packages to Jamf Cloud in particular that various people have been reporting. There is still no official endpoint for uploading packages to Jamf. So JCDS mode is a new method which effectively is a reverse engineering of the GUI upload process. So it only works with Jamf Cloud distribution points. It's not for self-hosted, and it's not for people who use an AWS Cloud distribution point. That's because it really depends on the sort of certain cookies and things that are set when you use Jamf Cloud distribution points. But Jamf Cloud admins have been reporting a greater degree of success with uploading packages using the JCDS mode. And to enable it, all you have to do is add the JCDS_mode key, set it to true in your AutoPkg preferences. It's experimental, unsupported by Jamf, and I do my best actually, although we are on premises still in my organization, but to try and increase adoption of JamfUploader, I want to make it as reliable as possible. That's all I have on JCDS mode.
Great. Let's hand it back to the moderators because I see that there are some questions populating up in the Q&A. So why don't we let Rusty?
Thanks, Anthony. So let's start with this first one. I have a security question. JamfUploader processors are in the recipes. Where are any authentication details needed for interacting with the Jamf API stored?
It's a good one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just trying to think. I thought we maybe had a topic on that.
We don't. I have slot.
Oh no, it's
slides. I actually let's see if I can stealthily unhide this. Oh no, I better. I killed the slide. Anyway.
It's okay. It's very straightforward. You have to store the API credentials in your AutoPkg preferences. So you actually want to make an account that has the least amount of privileges required for what you need. And this is where maybe it's worth going us into API privileges topic, which was covered, someone was asked as well in the Slack.
Yep, let's do that. So let me trigger the slides for API privileges.
Yes, so as I was saying, you need an account with the least required privileges for your workflow. The privileges required depend on which processes you're going to use. In general, you will need create, read, and update rights for those objects you're going to upload. For packages, you can remove the update rights if you are okay with updating a package which doesn't have any additional metadata such as category, file, hash, notes, etc. That's a recent change that we made for somebody who had pretty stringent requirements in their organization. And for policies, we have the Jamf policy deleter processor. So if you want to make use of that, you're going to have to add delete privileges for policies. You're also going to need read privileges for either your file share distribution point, if you're on-prem, or cloud distribution point, if you're in the cloud. And just to note that if you're using JCDS mode, which we just mentioned, you also need to add update privileges for SSO settings. So that's a requirement that is there to make that web scraping work, because it needs to go to the failover URL. I don't know if that answered your question, or if you still have a question about the security, but that's what we prepared.
All right, I believe this may have been covered, but we can go ahead and do it as a refresher. Are the policy templates the same format that we used in AutoPkg?
So not quite. As I said earlier, it's still XML. It's still derived from what you would download from the your Jamf Pro server. But the difference is there's no clever abstraction of those like scope and scripts and things like that. When I was designing this, I just thought it made more sense for the template to be closer to what you actually see in the API documentation you get and when you download it. And it actually provides more flexibility if you want to add more scripts, more policies, whatever. Like there was a particular issue with the way JSS importer was designed, where it was basically not possible to include script parameter labels in the script and also provide the parameter values in your policy. Because of that abstraction, it just kind of messed that whole thing up, and that was kind of important to me that worked. So it was just simpler to put those things back in the template as if you were just downloading it. As for smart group, it's basically the same. The XML is the same. You probably need to change the group name. I think there was a special key in JSS importer, like small letters group name. There's nothing clever in JamfUploader about that. You just provide the group name in as an input key. There are other processes that need templates, as Anthony said earlier, which including patch, and some of the more exotic ones, like if you want to maintain your account privileges via AutoPkg, which I'm started doing, that's a template as well. It's all the standard XML though.
Okay. Next question is, can we just reuse the policy template?
Well, you can't just reuse a JSS importer policy template, but once you've made your JamfUploader templates or a template, you can reuse it for any package and policy combination that fits that template. So if it's an app scope to the same, like not to the same smart group, but to the same combination of smart groups. For example, you're just scoping it to one smart group, and it's just one package. And there's no scripts or extension attributes, then you would just have a single policy template for all the apps that fit that kind of that way. And then you'll probably need another one if it's the type of policies that also need a post-install script. Or if you have some policies that have an exclusion group for whatever reason, then that will need a different policy template because you have to add the exclusion group. So you'll find patterns of apps that you make that can use the same template. And I mean, I've got quite a lot now because we have all sorts of different exotic policies. But as Anthony was talking about, just keep your naming convention make sense, and it's easy enough to find the one that you need.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, I said I push out about 50 titles. Now, some of them are multiple overrides of the same recipe, but I only have 8 templates, including both between policy and patch, like maybe 5 policy and 3 patch. So they're very good. They're very easy to reuse. And then when you have that one case where you have to scope it separately, or you want to do something tricky with the policy, it's a one-off and it's just fine. Why don't we keep going with questions?
All right. The next one comes from Bruce. It says, how dangerous is it to use a recipe from a repository that is not under your control? I guess you could continually evaluate their content, but that seems to be a time advantage killer.
I think
Anthony,
I want to take this.
I'm going to say, it's an AutoPkg question.
It is.
Yeah.
And so the answer is, go watch Elliot Jordan's talk on how not to do bad things with AutoPkg. The last one, the 2017 talk at this conference is the one that talks about, because he really raised these issues. And this talks about how trust implementation and always using overrides and verifying that trust is about it. It's all about it. So I recommend you take a look at that to answer that question more deeply. But in short, I verify every recipe I look at, and you get good at reading reading recipes. Be a little more circumspect if it uses a custom processor. But it's, yeah. Anyway, that's the source I want to point you to, because it's not unique to JamfUploader.
Great. Our final question, in AutoPkg /recipes that sometimes generate weird version numbers, such as Zoom, that have trouble setting up smart groups with the correct version number, will there be an easy way to alter version numbers to match what Jamf looks for on file systems? Then they say Google Drive is an example, but they just posted to disregard, but I think this is a good question anyways.
There absolutely is, and this is where extension attributes come in. You may need to switch how you get the version number. So the default for Jamf is that for most apps, it's unnecessarily complicated here with Jamf, but for most apps it uses a key in the info.plist of an application called CF bundle short version string, except for reasons, Microsoft apps where it uses CF bundle version. If the number that's available to you, or the number that makes sense, isn't the one that Jamf reads, like you might find that the one that Jamf reads is different for the one you see in Finder, then you need to use an extension attribute. In my repo, I have a kind of a single extension attribute that I can reuse, that sort of you substitute in the app name, and it goes and looks in the info.plist for whichever key you want, be it CF bundle short version string or CF bundle version. And then you add the Jamf extension attribute uploader processor to your recipe, and it will give you the version you need.
Yeah, I want to pile on that too, because I did touch on that briefly in my spoken word, but it didn't show up on the slide. I know I have things where patch hasn't matched the version number that the app is reporting, or conversely, I had one recipe where Package Builder didn't like the fact that there was a parenthetical number in there, and I was having to build a package. So I've got a situation where I split that off and then ran versioner again after that, so that I'd have a version that, in the case of patch, I could match it to. So that's why I mentioned Elliot Jordan's version splitter or find and replace, because then you can manipulate those type of things to match what you want. And I see our hosts getting ready, so because I see 1 minute on the clock, because we got to AutoPkg, we mentioned AutoPkg, I think it's worth just talking about this as our last topic. So Graham?
Yeah, so AutoPkg does now support JamfUploader to some extent. Sean Honsberger, who's the maintainer now, has been working on this for the past few months. I think this is one of those other sort of projects that suffers slightly from someone taking it over from somebody else, but there is some support, but there are still a few things to be fixed. Firstly, YAML-based recipes are not found in AutoPkg. So if you're depending on AutoPkg, you should write your Jamf recipes in plist format. It doesn't matter about parent recipes, it's the recipe you're searching for. And secondly, the configuration options for JamfUploader in AutoPkg are not correct. So these bits are okay, like adding the Jamf URL and the username and password, but these other bits are wrong because they're kind of, these are relevant to JSS importer and not to JamfUploader. Until these are fixed, we recommend that you use simple defaults commands to configure the required settings. This is all explained in our wiki, which is on the link at the bottom there.
Yeah,
Anthony?
It also shows up in the JNUC presentation as well. Having said that, a nice addition in this latest version of AutoPkg is that the reports that AutoPkg that can send via email or Slack or Teams now correctly include the summary information from the current JamfUploader processors. Previously, you could only get that summary information by running the recipes on the command line or using the Teams or Slack processors that Graham mentioned off the top. And so now as I said, the slides will have all the other topics that we didn't get to. So how do you get those slides? Well, wait about 5 minutes until I populate this blog post, and you will be able to download the slides. And of course, you can always join us in the Jamf Upload channel, the MacAdmins Slack. Thanks for your time today, everyone. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to give a huge thank you to Anthony and Graham for taking the time to deliver today's first session.